Today I want to talk about my birth experiences. I thought about it for a long time, whether I should do this. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because it's simply connected to memories and, of course, partly to pain as well. But I decided to do it anyway because I know that, unfortunately, many people experience traumatic births and that this is often normalized. Of course, I don't think that's right. Exactly. So with my first birth, we wanted to have as natural a birth as possible. I didn't want any medication. I actually wanted the placenta, or rather the umbilical cord, to stay attached as long as possible, and for everything to go as naturally as possible, even though we were going to the hospital. That was my wish. I actually communicated that quite clearly when we arrived at the hospital. My English still wasn't that good. When I was pregnant, because we hadn't been in Australia for long. But in hindsight, I think it wasn't really a language barrier at all. Because Malte was there too, and his English was actually great. It was more just the communication with the midwife itself. We just didn't warm up to each other. There was just no connection at all. I don't know what it was. Maybe we just weren't very likable to each other. There was no rapport on either side. I don't know. In the end, the problem was simply that there was no chemistry between us. Yeah, she was pretty much on the computer the whole time, busy typing, and she didn't really focus on me or on us at all when we arrived. Or rather, she was basically like that the whole time. I went to the hospital and I was already having very strong contractions, really with almost no breaks in between. The contractions were coming about every minute, I can honestly say. So I really didn't have any breaks between contractions anymore. As soon as one contraction was over, the next one started. That's pretty much how it was already when we arrived. But I was actually handling it quite well. Actually, I also communicated that to her, that I can handle pain pretty well, that I didn't want any painkillers, not even gas or anything like that. But she kept saying the whole time that I needed to breathe differently, that my breathing wasn't right. But I felt good about it, and I also told her that, actually, I made that quite clear, as far as I can remember. But she still kept saying the whole time that I wasn't breathing properly and that I needed to breathe differently, otherwise she would have to give me gas. And of course I didn't want that. I told her that too, but I just couldn't breathe the way she wanted me to. So I tried, and she kept talking at me, actually getting more and more aggressive and louder, that this has to change because otherwise I have to take the gas. And when I again said no, that I didn't want it, she then said that if I didn't take it now, she would have to get a doctor. And at that point, a bunch of red alarm bells went off in my head because I thought, doctor means a C-section, and of course I absolutely didn't want that. And that's ultimately why I agreed to the gas, which actually isn't really a painkiller in that sense, but it really just, it gives you a euphoric feeling where everything feels a bit more indifferent. That's how I would describe it. Afterwards, I was also high. The midwife confirmed that I was basically like drunk or something. And I then asked myself, and still do today, how are you supposed to bring a child into the world when you're no longer in control of your senses? Of course, now I imagine it would be even more difficult, but it really was hard. Yes, unfortunately, that wasn't all I experienced. The next thing that happened was she wanted to do CTG the whole time. The whole time I had those things, I don't even remember what they're called, stuck to my belly. And of course, during contractions, they kept slipping out of place. Because obviously you curl up a bit when you're in pain. She kept yelling at me that I had to stay seated in the exact spot where she put me. I wasn't allowed to move them. That really, she was actually there the whole time and saw what I was doing. So I didn't remove them or anything. It's just that I shifted around a bit. She blamed me for it and scolded me, telling me I had to leave them there. Yeah, that was another thing where I thought, okay, that's something I don't want to go through again. And what is actually the worst memory is that she absolutely wanted me to go to the toilet and urinate. And I tried. I just couldn't pee. So it just didn't work. Then I stood under the warm shower thinking maybe it would work under the shower. It just didn't work. I sat on the toilet crying. She yelled at me. If I didn't go now, then I would always have to get a catheter. Then I would need a catheter because my bladder would be way too full. As I said, I just couldn't. That was then the end of it, that I got a catheter. And what was even worse is that my home birth midwife requested the entire report of the birth. And it turned out that my bladder was completely empty. So there was absolutely nothing in it. But at that time, I couldn't imagine that they would lie to me or make up a story. Instead, I thought it was my fault. I just thought I was being stupid for not being able to go to the toilet. I blamed myself. Eventually, I just gave in and reluctantly allowed the medical staff to go ahead and put in the catheter. Which was, of course, a mistake, because as I said, it turned out that there was no urine in my bladder at all. It was empty. Exactly when I was already lying there. In addition to the catheter, I had to lie in the hospital bed on my back. Did they put it in then? And then at some point, doctors also came in. And then she wanted to finally deliver Mika with the vacuum extractor because I was no longer able to give birth to him myself. Firstly, being on my back made everything even more difficult, of course. By then, I was already in such a state that I was just completely exhausted from crying. The psychological pressure that was exerted by the gas, that I managed to get through it. Fortunately, everything turned out well. He was delivered with the vacuum extractor, and then afterwards, without my consent, they immediately injected something into my thigh. When I asked what that was, they explained to me that it was oxytocin so that the placenta would come out quickly. They said it had to be done because I was bleeding so heavily and had already lost so much blood. They told me they had to stitch me up very, very quickly now, and that's why the placenta had to come out very quickly. Of course, at the time, I believed that everything was being done correctly. And now, reading the report, I unfortunately find out that I had hardly lost any blood at all, so there was absolutely no urgency. I had only lost a minimal amount of blood, and there would have been plenty of time to wait and deliver the placenta naturally. Exactly. Then, after the birth, she wanted to give both me and Meek antibiotics because supposedly we both had a slightly elevated temperature. Even though I was so exhausted, I still resisted it, but then I gave in again. I still remember they even called me a bad mother if I didn't give it to my child. And I remember that 5 people were standing around my bed. They were all talking at me, some of them shouting, telling me I had to give it to them now, and that it would be far too risky. So I then suggested that they take my blood, and if they could prove to me that there were bacteria in my blood, then I would talk to Maria again. I would consider the antibiotics, but I definitely would not give it prophylactically shortly after the birth. That's exactly what we did. Malte came along, he had my blood taken, and it turned out that there was absolutely nothing wrong. It was simply due to the exertion of the birth, and of course the exertion for me as well. Plus, I hadn't drunk anything at all during those 12 hours and had vomited several times. I was simply dehydrated and completely exhausted. And of course that can cause your body temperature to rise a bit. But afterwards, as I said, everything was fine. After the birth, I actually didn't talk to anyone about it afterwards. So even you, Malte, and I didn't really talk about it anymore. We were, of course, just happy with Mig and everything was wonderful. And he was an incredibly sweet child. Everything went well and I basically just suppressed it. I didn't think it would be this extreme. Charged. I didn't really want another child. A few years later, however, the desire arose for a sibling for Mick. And when I was pregnant, or rather before I was pregnant, we had already decided that we would have a home birth this time. We don't want to go to the hospital again. And when all of this came up in conversation, and then when I was pregnant, the memories of the birth naturally came back. And then For the first time, it was like, oh dear, fear. I really don't want to go through that again. But now I've decided to do it and just thought, okay, somehow you'll get through it. You've made it through once, so you'll get through it a second time as well. At least now I can find my own midwife and then everything will get better. But of course the fear was still there. But luckily I found a really, really wonderful midwife. And she went through everything with me again. As I said, she requested all the documents. And then we had many, many long conversations. It was clear to me that I was completely traumatized then. So I kept breaking down in tears whenever we talked about it. And yes, she really helped me to get over it. And also for the most part helped me overcome my fear of the second birth. The pregnancy itself was a bit more difficult. This time, because I lost 2 dear people during the pregnancy, I kept having spotting and was simply afraid of losing the baby. That fear was pretty big. Before the second pregnancy, I also had well, it's usually just called a miscarriage. So I had already been pregnant once, but then it turned out to be nothing. And of course, that was still on my mind, always the fear of losing the baby again. So the whole pregnancy was a bit more difficult than the first one. But when the time finally came and the birth got closer and closer, of course, the fear was there again, the fear of experiencing something terrible again. But actually, I